Hello and welcome to the Euros conversation that I am having with two people. One of them is JJ Bull and the other is Jon Mackenzie. Today is a quick review of the group stages with three very deep and interesting questions to get things started with. So welcome, thanks for being here, and thanks to me for being here as well. Jon, one thing you want to talk about, that's the first question, because we knew we weren't going to get through this without you mentioning something that I wouldn't otherwise have asked you. Yes. So question number one thing you would like to talk about.
I want to talk about Spain.
Okay.
Because I think Spain are the team that everyone is now talking about maybe as the favourites for this tournament off the back of the group stages, which is always a dangerous thing.
Some of us said before the tournament, unless they don't win, and then in which case I did not do that.
But yeah, Spain, really fun. Spain have come off the back of a World Cup performance, which wasn't particularly, I said that weird.
A World Cup?
World Cup performance that wasn't particularly great. They had Luis Enrique and they were playing this sort of, what we would come to call.
It's as live, Jon.
So
yeah, there's no editing of this. That's because it's as live.
So people are going to see just how bad I am at my job.
They're going to see this right now,
right, okay.
Yeah. But you were talking about the World Cup.
Yes. Spain came into this, you expect them to play Guardiola-style football, right? Patient build-up, sustainable build-up, moving the ball through lines of pressure, squeezing the opposition deep into low blocks and breaking them down.
That's certainly what I expect.
Yes, but what they did differently this time round was they played some really exciting wide forwards. So you've got Nico Williams and Lamine Yamal playing as the wide forward options. In the World Cup, they went with Dani Olmo, I think, in the opening game, and Ferran Torres as well. So it's a very different profile of player.
You just call them wingers rather than forwards, really, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think so. And the reason why I think this is interesting is because, on the one hand, obviously, when you play players like that, you have the option to go much more direct because they are more direct players. But actually what I think is super interesting about this is that it actually allows you to do a lot of the sorts of things that you want a patient build-up team to do anyway, even though these players are maybe more direct profiles. So I just want to break down what I mean by that, which is obviously the problem with playing really slow, stodgy build-up, as we've seen from England, is that you end up in these scenarios where you squeeze the opposition, they sit in a block, and suddenly it becomes very hard to generate any kind of chances. You inevitably end up just sort of slinging it into the box and hoping that a big man scores. That's what Germany do at the end of their games. They bring on Niklas Füllkrug and then they hope he heads one in, and often he does.
First half they play Niklas Füllkrug.
Right,
yeah. That's thrown me.
Sorry.
It's as live.
What's super interesting about this is that by having the option of playing direct, they can also create space around the pitch using these players, which means that they can actually generate space for their teammates to actually do build-up stuff in. So I just want to show a few screenshots to just give you a sense of what I mean by this. So this is Spain in the game against Italy. This was the second game they played. The third game they changed everyone up, so I haven't used that one. But what we've got here is Lamine Yamal and Nico Williams here. And what we can see is they're pushing really high up the field. This is the two fullbacks for Italy, so you're forcing the Italy back line deep because they can't afford to allow either of these two players a huge amount of space. What this is doing actually is creating space between Italy's blocking pressing unit here in the block and the back line. So you're creating space, even though by having the option of going long, what you're doing is actually still creating more space for these players deeper in the field then to do some of the build-up work that they're doing. So this is a situation where the move actually breaks down, but the ball comes to Rodri, who plays this first-time ball into Lamine Yamal, into Nico Williams here. And the problem that we start seeing for Italy is that this is Chiesa, who's the wide forward for Italy. They want to double up on Nico Williams. This is Di Lorenzo, the fullback. As a result of this ball going forward, the direct ball from the midfield, they have to drop one of their wide forwards back, which means that then you're starting a lot of the time, because what we'll see now is this is Nico Williams, double marked by Di Lorenzo and Chiesa. They're right on the edge of the box, so the corner of the penalty area is here. If this move breaks down and they lose, and the worry would be Italy can now counter-attack, one of their wide forwards is basically in their own box, so you're changing the dynamics of what's going on, making it harder for these teams to actually break. And
presumably there's like loads of space in front then for
this is the other interesting thing, right? So this is immediately after that shot, so we can see we can see Di Lorenzo and we can see Chiesa here, and this is Nico Williams. What he's doing is he's got sort of almost like gravitational pull, pulling other players towards him, and it actually allows them to break down the low block in different ways. So there's two things here. One of them is that we've now got Cucurella, the fullback, running around the back, playing on the overlap. What that means is Di Lorenzo is going to have to pull in. Because you have the option here as well of Nico Williams coming inside and playing the shot, you can see that Jorginho is sitting here as well in the box.
Yeah.
This is the block, and look how narrow that block is. Super narrow. That means that when Rodri comes in here, there's the option of playing the ball short here as well. So by playing with someone like Nico Williams, despite the fact that what they've done here is they've played a really direct ball, they forced Italy into a block, but then they've got really nice ways of being able to pull that block apart, all from having a player like this who just demands this gravitational pull. If the opposition are pressing really high, so Italy are in this scenario where it's with the centre-back on the right-hand side, they're going to jump right up to try and press the ball. And the Lenormand, the centre-back, is going to play the ball down the line. And because we've got these two wide players who you don't want to leave free, you can see that they've pushed the whole of the Italy back line deep. Look at the amount of space that's created in the middle. If you do want to play through the block, there's loads of space to attack. But also we've got 1v1 matchups all across the back line here. And you've got Pedri, Yamal, Morata and Williams here as well. They're all very good in sort of 1v1 scenarios in space, so you're going to get the advantage of being able to go long as well. So what's super interesting about this Spain is that they become a bit more tactically diverse for me, and it gives them the advantage of being able to play direct, but also it gives them a better advantage to do the stuff that Luis Enrique is trying to do as well.
It's almost as well like the players are allowed to decide when to do it, so rather than it being, you can predict exactly how Spain are going to build and play and where the players are going to be, they seem to have a bit more of individual freedom to be able to do something.
I think it's not completely automated.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, there's a little bit of freedom. There's a lot of automation in there, but it's almost like it's almost like the difference between zonal and man marking. Like you just, when you're in certain phases, then you latch onto an automation, but then you come out of it and you allow the freedom. So it's very hard to play against.
Okay, well, yeah. I'm just sitting here wondering what it would be like to support a national team that played a style of football that was reflected in some of the best club games of all time. Anyway, never mind. Fine. Spain, interesting. John's favourite. John says they're definitely going to win the Euros. It's as live. JJ, what about you now? I think I know where you're going to go with this. One thing, maybe not that you would like to talk about, but that you feel sort of nationally compelled to discuss.
We must, yes.
Yeah.
I want to talk about, because I think it's interesting to try to divide your support for a team with whether they're actually good or not. So
I don't know what you mean.
So Scotland were terrible in the Euros. They were genuinely awful.
They were bad.
Yeah.
It was funny at the beginning, and then as a judge of how bad they were, I kind of stopped finding it funny at your at your behest.
Well, that's fine. Well, I mean, I would like to say, well, at least they tried, but there's a lot of problems here. So they did obviously try, right?
Yeah.
So well done to the team. But I think the interesting thing with it, and why I'd like to talk about it, is because it's hard to work out, and you'll have the same conversations in Scotland now, whether it's a technical issue, whether players aren't good enough and that Scotland need better players and to develop the way that they coach players and bring them through, or whether it is getting things completely wrong tactically, and whether it's just really behind. Because there are teams who aren't that much big, or countries that aren't that much bigger than Scotland really, who are a lot better. Slovenia is like a population of 2 million. They were great against England, organised.
And it's not, when looking at this squad, I think I'm a good judge for this as a normal fan of football that doesn't know every player.
Pedro doesn't play for Scotland.
You know, the way that I John laughs at me, but the way I judge how well a team is going to do in the Euros, here's how I play points are bad, basically, is I look at the team and I see how many of these players do I know, and if I know more of them, I think they're going to win. That's it. When I look at the Scotland team, I think that there are several players there that are of very good quality.
Well, Robertson's won the Champions League, so has Billy Gilmore actually.
Sure.
Then you've got McGregor, constant league winner at Celtic, could definitely have played high-level Premier League. Tierney, a Champions League level player. Christie is a Premier League level player. Scott McTominay, Champions League level player. He is.
Shea Adams did well with Southampton for a long time as well.
Yeah, but then this is the thing, so it all breaks down. And so when you have worse players than the opponent, the natural inclination is that if you can't, you don't. So you should then therefore sit back in this kind of 5-4-1, get your players in, and you sit back deep and you try and hit it long to a tall player up the pitch and try and play off of them, try and play the counter-attack. Now Scotland have had some success with this. In qualification, managed to beat Spain, beat Norway with 2 late goals, playing with Lyndon Dykes up front, who's a very different kind of player to Adams. He's more aggressive, he's able to hold the ball up better and bring people in. But you had this set up from Steve Clarke, and if you compare that to what Austria have done particularly, so Austria have a good base, they've got a higher base I would say than Scotland do. The players playing Bundesliga, Liga, Serie A, but they've players. One of them is at West Brom. They've got players who aren't incredible, but the unit is stronger because the players are built into a system that works. There's a difference between like individual players and systems. So this system here, so like Germany, we knew how Germany were going to play. Very narrow. They play with 4 very narrow players. Like Havertz, I've not got names on them, but just take it for what it is. So they're all going to be like this. So Nagelsmann had this figured out, and it was clear within about 1 minute of the very first game. So Scotland very limited. Injuries have hampered some of this to Dykes, and especially losing Patterson and Hickey on the right hand side. But what Germany did, and it couldn't be corrected for whatever reason early, is they had 4 players playing between the lines. Then they had a back 3, which was 2 defenders and Tony Kroos. I think I highlight Kroos because he was important. Then you had 1 player playing as a pivot, and then you had others, the fullbacks, pushing up. So I think, John, I think we agree with this. Like, so the fullbacks were positioned specifically to try and cause problems for these wing backs for Scotland, because rather than pushing up and providing all the width that you'd expect, because you're obviously very narrow here, that the whole Germany team is in that odd shape I've drawn here.
A bus,
yeah. So they're all on the bus. But the fullbacks have stayed slightly deeper, so Robertson didn't know whether to go, Wilson didn't know whether to go, so they were caught in no man's land. And then you had these forwards who were either dropping, dragging someone with them, which then left space for someone to go in behind, and they're pulled all over the place. And I don't think it's that without the realms of comprehension that the manager of a national team would have expected something like this to happen, and to have given them clear instructions.
particularly when Musiala and Florian Wirtz are both playing on the other team.
Yeah, and like so the information that came out after the tournament is that, well, after the game, is that Clarke said that he gave them too much information, so they're confused as to what to do with it.
Which can happen, to be fair, right?
100%, and you have to give them like clear instructions, but you've had this long to prepare for it. And whereas like Rangnick will have given Austria a lot of prep, like they are clearly well drilled in a system that works to the betterment of the individual players that they have. And you have players like McGinn, McTominay, McGregor, Christie, who should be able to play together, and you should be able to make that work. Billy Gilmore should be able to come in and make this work. But what we saw from this tournament was some technical players who are high level and can play at that level and do better than they have done. But what you're also getting is just shoving players into positions. It sounds like another country you may have heard of, where you're putting players on the pitch to try and get your best players on there without making the actual best team. And I think teams like Scotland, with lower level players perhaps in some other countries, I know it makes sense to play defensively and try and minimise risk, but surely you want to play something like is it not less risky to try and pressure higher and dictate play that way? Like Slovenia pushed England at times, Austria pushed better teams than them, and who was it they played really well against? Netherlands they just beat. So they were pushing high constantly. Netherlands couldn't play out. They dropped the press later in the half, maybe like 35 minutes in, so they can save energy a little bit. And by doing that, they then conserve energy because they're not having to run all the time. And they also make the opposite team second guess everything they're doing. They can't play calmly.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's interesting that you're talking about Austria, because obviously Austria have Ralf Rangnick as their coach, and Ralf Rangnick has pushed this style of football that a lot of Austrian teams have used. A lot of Austrian players have gone through those Red Bull systems. And so in many respects with Austria, it feels almost like they're getting the benefit of the fact that they're able to adopt a tactical approach where a lot of those players have played in that system before. And
it was like when the England team had all Tottenham players in it, when Tottenham were good, right? Do you remember that?
I don't remember that.
No? Just me?
Eric Dyer, Kane,
Dele Alli
maybe
was in there
perhaps
as well.
a better example would be like the Spain team that was full of Barcelona players.
Yeah, better example, but a less cool one, John.
Yeah, but that's I think that's kind of interesting. Coming back to Scotland, though, I felt in this situation that this is a scenario where Germany are great for introducing tensions. Like, do you press up on their back 3 when they're in build-up? If you do, you're leaving space for these really exciting players in between the lines. Clearly, Steve Clarke was worried about balls through to those players, so he played quite a narrow 4 in the midfield. And as you say, he wanted to keep his wing backs deep, and that meant that what ended up happening was that there was access to the between the lines just round the side through the fullbacks for Germany all the time. That was an out of possession thing that they probably got wrong, but I felt as though in the other 2 games they had a huge amount of ball possession and didn't do much with it at all. And I think that was the thing that maybe I thought was most worrying, is that I do feel as though Scotland have come with in possession ideas. I feel as though part of what they've done in qualifying is actually have the ability to build with the ball and cause teams problems in that way. But when it came to this tournament, they just completely lost it.
I totally agree, and this is the thing that's frustrating about it. Whether it becomes not just technical and tactical, but whether it just is a mentality that you see at tournaments. What changes in there? Because you expect Scotland, these players, to be able to pass the ball around, but you can see these are the passing maps. Germany, then Scotland, Switzerland. It looks like a heavy reliance on Andy Robertson, but I hardly felt like he was on the ball. Yet clearly he was really important for creating the width. And this is the thing. So if you're trying to play a system that relies on having someone like Lyndon Dykes up top to really pivot around, he's the pivot basically, is Dykes. And then you have a player like Adams, you can't really do it. So you have to adjust, I think, and then change the way your team wants to play. But you can see that Hungary. So they realise that you give Scotland the ball and they're not going to try and put it through you because they're either scared or they lack the technical ability, or I think maybe the tactical setup to be able to play. Whenever someone had the ball in possession, you see that Hungary, the only real option they had was sideways at the back. Anyone through, there's no dialogue between the forward players. So you just get a team that can only play in their own half. As soon as you get in the opposition half, they pounce on you and go. And so it looks like, I can't tell whether it's that the players aren't good enough or whether the tactical setups were mostly wrong for these games, or all of it.
Well, I mean, we're going to have to press on, unfortunately. But one final question on Scotland, I suppose. Do you get the sense that this will be a kind of a moment of cultural import, for example? Like, do you think that the manner in which they went out of the tournament will provoke changes at the international level, or do you think it's just going to be,
It might be a change of manager. Someone might come in and change a little bit, and then it'll go wrong, and we'll get through qualifying. But I am still confident that we will win the World Cup.
Excellent stuff. Okay, fine, right. Moving on to question number 2. One thing or something that has surprised you, John. Let's begin with you. In a good or bad way, the question states. Something that surprised you.
I think this is the tactical quality of some of the teams that you don't expect to do much in this kind of tournament. So I talked a little bit about Albania in our preview show, and it turns out that my prediction that they would cause a few of the teams in that group of death to sweat turned out to be correct.
Doesn't sound very surprising to John, does it? It sounds like John's using the question about surprising to brag that he predicted something that was completely unsurprising to him.
That's right, yeah.
You did see it.
Oh, it's funny you asked me about surprising. What I'm completely unsurprised about.
It may have surprised you guys, but
it surprised me. Because I didn't hear you say that in the Euros preview. I wasn't paying attention. But who are you talking about?
Yeah,
Albania.
But I mean, I think Slovenia are a good example as well. These are teams who come in and they've implemented really good out of possession, particularly mid-block ideas, where and not just sort of playing in a mid-block. I think there's a lot of people will just be like, they played in a mid-block and it was therefore good, because it's often quite easy to just sort of sit in a block and make it hard for teams. But I thought there were some really creative ideas that were being used in their mid-block. So for example, Slovenia were pressing out with their wingers and keeping their forwards slightly deeper, which is something we saw. I mean, Man City were doing that last season in the Champions League a lot. So those kind of ideas, and being able to come to a tournament with a disparate group of players and be able to implement those tactics and have that sort of cohesion.
It's impressive.
It's impressive. We've just talked about how...
Well, just relate to Scotland. Surely you can coach that in a few sessions, even if it's international football. You don't have that long. They're all top-level pros.
And I think this is maybe an interesting, deeper point about the fact that all of these players are now playing at the highest level. Like, the Albania team is full of players who are in Serie A, for example. You mentioned that, Austria have players playing at the highest level as well. These guys are playing in systems that use these kind of ideas, so they should have at the back of their minds the capacity to be able to port those ideas into the international stage. And I think particularly out of possession, it should be easy to do because there's repetitiveness to those things. It's if you're playing in a 4-4-2, for example, out of possession, which a lot of teams do at the elite level, you should be able to know, right, I know exactly how it feels to play in this way. It shouldn't be too difficult to do that. And so we're starting to see some of that coming through, I think, at the tactical level. And it's meant that maybe some of the groups have looked a little bit odd because teams that you might not expect to do well have done well off the back of being able to be fairly well structured out of possession. Yeah, for sure. Okay, what about you? Something that has surprised you?
I was surprised, mine's short. I'm surprised by how good Fabian Ruiz and Vitinha are. So two players that I never really see much of. They both play at PSG in Ligue 1, which is the league I don't watch enough of or any of. And so they're like, Fabian Ruiz is properly amazing. He's running games for Spain, and then Vitinha has been outstanding for Portugal in the same sort of role. They're very much like the same sort of player. Interesting that they're both at PSG because they'd be doing exactly the same sort of thing. Almost like Marco Verratti didn't really get any attention paid to him when he was there, when he was very, very good as well. Like those players, that's what I noticed.
Terrific stuff. Okay, fine. Right, well, final question, and there'll be more opportunity to talk about this in the future, so we'll hurtle through slightly. England, John.
Yes, I've had the pleasure of covering every England game.
You've made a video after each one. Sometimes it's been hard to find an angle because they have been. The performance has been complicated in similar ways.
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple of reasons why it's tough. One is that obviously people want to have good news stories about England, and obviously the performances so far haven't been good enough to really justify any kind of celebration of what they're doing. 2 goals scored in the group stages, and both of those came from deflected balls before the goal was scored. So
only one conceded though.
Only one conceded, yes, and that was a pinger from many yards out.
It was a fine goal.
Really nice goal. But tough to find positives in what's going on. And I think the reason why it's been tough talking about England from a tactical point of view is because, it's the very stuff that we've been talking about with England under Southgate the whole way through, which is he doesn't have a particularly complex tactical system. The tactical system is be solid, get good players in your formation in places where they can succeed, and hope for them to succeed in those slots.
It's sort of what Didier Deschamps and the French team do, right?
It's a perfectly cromulent way of playing international football.
He's such a bad guy when he says things like cromulent.
No, I'm all for it.
Is it cromulent a Simpsons reference?
It is, yes.
Yeah, I believe so.
It's a perfectly cromulent word.
Yeah, exactly. So. There you go. If it's good enough for Simpsons, it's good enough for us.
Here's a question for you, though, and maybe for you as well. I'll open it up to the table. We were just talking about this as it related to the most famous example being the England-Tottenham team. Of course, the latter famous example being the Spain-Barcelona team.
Germany-Bayern Munich team.
Germany-Bayern Munich teams. One thing that's interested me about watching England so far has been Jude Bellingham playing at the number 10, just behind Harry Kane. Phil Foden playing on the left-hand side. These are two undoubtedly talented as hell players, like absolutely brilliant, but one of them plays for a Guardiola team which is like insanely structurally decided, and the other plays for Real Madrid and is like seemingly encouraged to like grab the moment by the horns. I'm saying things that don't make sense.
I get what you're saying.
Is it free for? I read free because someone just sent me a message that said free. Is it possible for 2 players like that play in such different domestic teams to be put together and for it to work? Because it seems so far that Phil Foden looks like a player who's like waiting for everyone else on the team to do the right thing, and when they're not about halfway through the game, he's like, I'll have to run over here then and try something which I'm not doing on a regular basis.
And I think like the first game we saw Bellingham was great in the first game, but he was doing everything, which becomes problematic because everyone else has to get out of his way. And I wonder whether he was asked to do slightly less in the second and third game. I don't think he was quite as involved. He wasn't. It's weird to say not as good. But when you're trying to go everywhere and always asking for the ball, good players can't also always be asking for the ball. You need to get out of the way and free up him for other spaces. But then you've also got the lack of. I think the obvious thing people are talking about, the left-hand side, is really clear because if Foden comes inside, which he does, the rotation is meant to be that Bellingham can swap out there or someone goes out there. But when Bellingham goes out there, he likes to keep the ball and play with a few touches. Foden wants quick 1-2 touches. So the tempos are like different in exactly the same part of the pitch. And then you're lacking, you give the ball to Saka on the right-hand side. Like John's covered the right-hand side not being quite as strong, and I was always thinking it was the left problem. But you see the right, like when Saka has the ball, they slow him down, doesn't really get to drive past anyone, and it all slows down and goes backwards. Goes out left, and you've got a right footer who hooks it into the back post, and there's no one there to try and attack it. And the balance of it, I think, is all wrong. The players look like they're playing on different frequencies, and so it's not cohesive. And I think the stuff Kane said was interesting about not knowing exactly when and where to press, who's meant to be doing what and when.
What's been so interesting for me is that when you're trying to do tactical analysis of teams, you sort of want to have kind of structural ideas there that you can tap into and say, this is what they're trying to do. We've already mentioned that with Southgate, it does feel a little bit more ad hoc, and so I think a lot of the discussion about how you improve England has come down to this player isn't playing well enough, so we take them out because
and replace them with another player.
You're not trying to get advantages through the structure, you're trying to get advantages through the individual. So the big question is, in previous tournaments, Kane has scored a lot of goals. But he's not scoring now. So what do? You're in this situation where you're like, well, do we bring in Ollie Watkins and just see if he can score more goals, despite the fact that Kane's coming off one of the most prolific seasons he's ever had, right? So I think the big thing for me, maybe this again ties back to what we were saying about some of these smaller nations being able to defend better. raises the question whether or not in previous seasons you could get away with this kind of play, where you're just relying on individuals and you hope that a couple of your like really elite players have really elite tournaments. But we're seeing that happen, I think, less and less. And perhaps this is going to be the narrative that's going to go one way or the other, because if a team like Germany or Spain wins with clear tactical ideas about how to win, people are going to say, we're in a new era of
which would be fair
football.
because, like, you know, the way we talk about international football, there is clearly a kind of a latency between ideas being brought in the domestic game and ideas following through into the international game, and that's obviously because there's far less time for the players to play with each other, there's far less time for the coaches to coach those ideas, so they intentionally coach simpler, less complex tactical systems anyway, because otherwise, you know, you made the point with Steve Clarke, like you can give players too much information. But when you look at the evolution of domestic club football over the last 20 years, when, you know, the common argument people will have is like, well, what about Alex Ferguson's best Man United team? It's clear that they didn't have to do the same things that Pep Guardiola's Man City team do now to win, because the worst teams couldn't defend as well.
Yeah.
Maybe the same thing's happening with international
training
football.
at club football is entirely different to international. You're there every single day for often seasons at a time, and managers stagger what they get. Like Guardiola's Man City was several years in the making. You know, do it in small batches. And I mean, football, you can make it as complicated as you want. It can also be very simple. The best players tend to win the game, but they need good structure to be able to be the best that they can. And it might be that, like, England's it's an unsolvable problem, and that maybe the best thing they could have done was build around just one player. Maybe Kane is the one we need to get the most out of, so let's build around him. Bellingham's the one. If it's Bellingham, for example,
which it looks like it is now.
Well,
right?
he was at his best at Real Madrid in the first half of the season when they played two wide forward wingers, really fast ones running in behind. So you'd probably have Gordon and probably Saka on the other side running to try and stretch it, but no striker. So there was always a space there for him to attack when he wanted to, and then he would drop deep to help out in certain phases. So then you drop Kane. We can't drop Kane because that's mad. Foden is best when he plays maybe off the right but slightly in one of the half spaces as an attacking midfielder to link with people around him who are holding positions. But they're not really holding positions, they're trying to attack slowly then going backwards, so he's not going to benefit out of him either.
Foden feels, I know they're not like very similar players, but Foden feels like the Paul Scholes of this England generation, in that like he might well be the best player there, but like he's the one that looks like he's not fitting in the team.
I would build it around Phil Foden.
Yeah. The main thing I hope before we finish is, and this is just this is a sentimentality issue. It's not something that either of you will appreciate or enjoy. But the narrative, in the direction of Gareth Southgate, I understand it, and I now feel as though I don't expect England to win the Euros, which is the first time I could say that come the end of the group stage in the last.
They'll way to the semi-finals.
Yeah, I'm sure they will, right? But like, what I hope is that Gareth Southgate's England legacy isn't just like entirely festered with what, you know, the feelings, the sentiments of the last week or two, because I don't think that does the adequate amount of service to what he has achieved. But it's, you know, putting that to one side, it doesn't feel like it's working, and it is upsetting.
There's obviously a huge amount of like baggage with like supporting any national team. But I think at the end of the day, football should be fun, and this football is so unenjoyable.
It's unfun.
Yeah, that no one. It's not even like, even if England go deep in this tournament.
Yeah.
Even the fans aren't really able to enjoy it, because it then just becomes about, well, we've sort of scabbed our way through as far as we can go.
Yeah.
There has to be something that you look forward to. Like, you don't want a deflected cross that Bellingham heads in and a ball rattling around and Kane having a tap in to be like the extent
it's
of your enjoyment.
It's different if you're like Greece or Portugal or Portugal or Scotland or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, take that.
Because the results are the...
Because you're fighting against it. When you got that ability to be much better, like France get it right, I think, the way they do it. Like,
sure.
They still have moments of fun, but France also do have really good wingers. And
France make their team the sum of their parts, right? And there's other teams out there which we're saying maybe Germany will make their team more than the sum of their parts. Either way, you can win a tournament by playing those ways. At the moment, England are worse than the sum of their parts, so you're getting neither of the benefits of those. And as on top of that, then it's not fun to watch as well. So it's almost like a lot of the times I go into England games being like, well, what are we actually, like, what are we doing here? I think a lot of people are sharing that sentiment, right?
What are we doing here?
Yeah.
Well, indeed. I've got to go now. But we'll be back next week with some live streams. We're not loads of them. I don't know how many they're going to be. The point is, we'll be back. There'll be more discussions about England. We'll talk about some of the other teams too. Join us for the remainder of the tournament, where we will be here asking, what are we doing here?
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and Rafa Honigstein. With the latest transfer news and insight on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.